somewhere around 11 a.m. So completely out of the loop on this side. But either way, I was more focused on this issue of our 5 things for this week. We're calling it the Shockwave Takeover issue. If you've been following DKI at all over the last week or 2 weeks, obviously Shockwave Medical, big news. We'll get to that in a minute. 2 special guests this week, which we're really excited about, both bringing different angles, different ends of the spectrum. So we'll be really excited for that. And Gary, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our first guest right out of the gate.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Rob. So here on the 5 things, the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about commercial real estate, and we've been getting a lot of questions about it. So we thought we would bring you an expert. I have with me Howard Freedland from Echo Fine Properties and Echo Commercial Properties. Howard is also a member of the Deep Knowledge Investing Board of Advisors. He is a real estate broker and a real estate expert specializing in commercial real estate. Howard, how was your Eclipse Day?
My Eclipse Day was just outstanding. Thank you very much for asking. Just to correct, I'm not a broker. I am an associate, but nonetheless, the differences in my capabilities, I can still leap tall buildings with a single bound, and I can't stare at an eclipse without getting my eyes hurt.
All right, fair enough. Well, for somebody who's not a broker, I have seen you do millions and millions of dollars of both residential and commercial transactions. So something's going right there.
Appreciate you.
All right, so let's talk about the background for this key thing. There was an NAR settlement. NAR stands for National Association of Realtors. First, let's just explain to people what is that settlement? What does it mean? What actually happened?
Okay, so this all has to do with commissions, and it all has to do with bad behavior. And I have to be careful because right now the Department of Justice has been called in on this thing. So to say that this is an evolving situation that is extremely complex, to sum it up in one statement is very, very difficult. Let's just say bad behavior begets bad decisions. And the bad behavior was an awful lot having to do with commissions and requiring certain things of people when truly they could be negotiated.
Okay, so basically what was happening were certain real estate brokers who don't work at your firm were pressuring their clients to sign commission agreements that were disadvantageous to the client. As a result, there was a settlement from the National Association of Realtors that changes the way people will pay their real estate brokers. Is that a fair summation?
That's a fair summation. There's a little bit more nuance to it, but again, as it is evolving, I don't want to confuse the issue. The issue here is that we've got let's separate it into 2 categories, commercial and residential. We now have a residential real estate faction of this, of this business that is going to have to do their business differently. The commercial end isn't going to be affected as much because we've been doing that for a long time. To expand on that, what that means is that going forward, if this goes into if this gets enacted, you're going to see people with buyer representation agreements, whereas now we don't use them as much for residential. You're going to see predetermined commission negotiations as opposed to just, well, the seller's going to be responsible for X. It used to be that 6% was standard, 3% on the buy side, 3% on the sell side. Then you'd see, well, 6% turns into 4% and 2%. Maybe there's a side deal going on. That's what caused a lot of the hubbub, that it wasn't clean and straightforward. Now, what people are concerned about is, okay, are we going to have to pay for a buyer representation? Are we going to have certain expenses? Are those going away? It's causing a lot of consumers an awful lot of questions.
All right. So what I hear you saying is this legislation, the settlement, will not and doesn't affect the commercial real estate market because those broker agreements are already negotiated. And so this doesn't change the commercial market.
When I do a commercial deal, just for the sake of discussion, I'll go up to someone and say, okay, I want to represent you for this property or these properties. And it says, if we cannot come to an agreement with the seller, then we will talk about a supplemental commission agreement between us and the buyer. There is no predetermined commission.
Okay. So understood. The reason there's no change in pricing or the market on the commercial side is because those agreements were always negotiated.
Correct.
I've seen a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worries about how this change in regulation, the settlement, will affect residential real estate prices. What's your view? Does this make residential prices go up or down?
It has the potential to have prices, honestly, it has potential to have such a little effect that people are arguing over a very small amount right now. Let's see if we can understand this. So they offer 3% to the people that are selling for them. Buyers brokers aren't going to do their work for free. And if there aren't any buyers brokers, the job still has to be done. So the negotiation of contracts, the drawing up of contracts, the following the process through, all of these things will have to be contracted for. So there will be costs, whether they're borne upon the seller or the buyer is now going to be open for debate. Will the seller lower their price because they don't have a 3% amount hung on them? Probably not. I don't see it happening. If it happens, it's going to be a slight percentage of that. But I also don't think that it's going away either, because I think that sellers have an inherent need to want to motivate people to come in and show their homes.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is the maximum amount of pricing change on this could be 3%, but it could easily be yes. Sorry, not yes. It could easily be less. The thing that you wrote, and this is in the written version of the 5 things. I'm going to read this. This was Howard's line, which I thought was really interesting and a good way to frame the whole discussion. Talking about the need for home buyers to pay for some sort of assistance and some sort of representation. And it says the way they pay and the people they pay may change, but any meaningful change to housing prices as a result of the new rules is questionable at best. I think that's a great way to sum it up.
100%. We don't know. But ultimately, this job has to be done by professionals. And can you imagine what attorneys are going to charge to do this if they say, well, we don't want a real estate person to do it. I'll just have my attorney take care of it. Huh. What's your attorney going to say when you say, well, my inspection's got to be scheduled? Well, that's great. You should hire an inspector. Well, wait, shouldn't you be doing that? No. Why? Because you're not paying me.
Right. Or I'm happy to do it. This is what I charge by the hour.
Right.
Exactly. And you think you're not going to, I mean, you think we charge a lot as real estate professionals. Wait until you get that legal bill for every single thing that needs to be done. Not to mention, again, the nuance, the little things. And I think people get very cynical because of some bad actors. Of course, you have bad behavior and the entire group gets blamed for it. But there's a tremendous amount of work that gets done. And you're going to need people that are contracted to do it. So the conversation that I had with a client 2 weeks ago in negotiating, they didn't have representation on a house that my partner and I were trying to sell. And they said to me, well, I'll tell you what, because we'd offered a 1% break since we would have both sides. I said, we'll give you 1% towards closing costs. They said, no, we're going to ask for a 3% break. I said, so you're taking all of it. Okay. And they said, well, will you write up this contract? I said, no. And they said, why? Because you're not paying for me to do it. Oh, I said, you need to have an attorney draw up the contract. I said, okay, well, we can do that. That's fine. When it's accepted, we're going to need to do. They went through this litany of items that, of course, they knew had to be done. And they hadn't given any consideration to who was going to do it and who they were going to pay for it. So it came down to, by the time we line listed and did an a la carte menu, they're like, okay, maybe we should give you some percent. And I'm like, that's up to you. I can't. So I think that people are making short-sighted inferences based on what they think this decision means. It's evolving. This is a really complex decision. And I just wrote a piece, what I don't know. And it's as opposed to what I do.
Right.
It's more important right now to try to understand the basis by which it's happening and then follow it through with, okay, what's really going to make this work and what's the net effect going to be? It's going to be several months before we know the answer to those questions.
Howard, you might have answered the question a little bit right there with the uncertainty, but I actually had a client of mine. We represent a few different real estate brokers, agents.
Sure.
One gentleman who 95% he was telling me representation on the buyer's side, right? So he gave me a call, obviously in a panic, ready to at wit's end. What would you say to those guys? Is there any advice? Is it a wait and see? Because obviously that's where I think the business, he's uncertain, right, about how am I actually going to be making money moving forward.
So here's what I tell people, and this is not a holier than thou moment, right? I've been doing this a few years, and this can be put onto anybody doing any work anywhere, and that is refine your craft. Become really good at what you do. The best way you handle obsolescence is by honing your talent and showing that you deserve to be paid for what you do. It hasn't changed anything at this point. Right? It's still the same free for all it was before.
Right.
But, everybody needs to remember something, and that is this was all born out of bad behavior. So show good behavior, show work product. And honestly, the attorney for Echo has been working with the company to make sure that we have documentation that is above board and very, very clear. We have to sit with every client now. And even though it hasn't gone into, it hasn't been enacted, we're going with everybody and explaining, look, this is a process by which everybody needs to make a commission. And here's what we're doing for our commission. And these are the things we're tending to. And we're trying to be a lot more transparent and a lot more direct with how that is. So again, it's on our shoulders to prove that we deserve to be paid for what we do. So it's about work.
All right.
And he's right to be nervous. There's a lot of people running around with very bad information right now. Sure. And the best thing I can say is, please stop reading everybody's opinion on this and go with what you know. And if what you know is zero, then work harder at being good at what you do.
Howard, great description of the situation with the NAR decision, explaining the lack of effect on commercial real estate prices and the potential but small effect on residential. I know you are a third-degree black belt in a very specific form of martial arts, and you are on your way to go teach.
Yes.
So congratulations on achieving that rank. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great class.
I'm going to go get punched and hit. And I appreciate that. Look, Rob, Gary, it's fantastic to see you. And, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Howard.
We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Take care.
Great. Yeah, really interesting, Gary. Yeah, my client called me in an absolute panic. I hadn't even known what happened. And he was at wit's end. But yeah, very interesting. Kind of same thing though. He said the same, hey, he's still got 3-4 months now after he cooled down to where, well, we're not really sure what exactly is going to happen. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Again, if you're following along, that was our point number 5, real estate commission chaos. What's it mean for you? Howard Freedland. Howard, thanks for being on. Member of DKI Board of Advisors as well. And now, first time ever,